Something is tearing Iran apart from the inside, and it has nothing to do with US bombs. Picture a street in Tehran right now, not the news footage of missiles and smoke you have been watching for 2 months. A regular street, a family trying to buy groceries. A currency so destroyed that on January 14, 2026, $1 cost 1,750,000 Iranian rials. $1. 1,750,000 rials. The Iranian rial had become the least valuable currency on earth. Not in the running for least valuable, the actual least valuable currency of any country on the entire planet. At least one financial platform was displaying the rial's dollar equivalent as zero, not literally zero, but so close to zero that the system rounded down. And here is the number that should stop every person watching this cold. Iran's own Ministry of Social Welfare announced in 2024 that 57% of Iranians were experiencing some level of malnourishment. 57%. More than half the population of a country of 92 million people, going hungry, before a single American bomb fell on February 28. And the Hudson Institute, one of America's most respected foreign policy think tanks, published an analysis this year with one sentence that should be required reading in every newsroom on earth. It said, "No matter what happens now, there is no scenario in which the Islamic Republic survives 2026 with its power intact. Not military power, not economic power, not political power. The bombs did not start this collapse. The bombs just made everyone look." Tell me in the comments, did you know Iran was already collapsing before this war started? Here is what you are not hearing on most channels covering the Iran war, because the daily missile updates and ceasefire negotiations crowd out the deeper story. Iran's collapse did not begin when America went to war on February 28. It did not begin with the 12-day war in June 2025. It did not begin with any American action at all. It began with 4 decades of decisions Iran's own leadership made, and kept making, long after those decisions were clearly destroying the country. Economists and analysts have identified 4 structural causes of Iran's internal collapse that accumulated across 40 years until the house of termite-eaten wood finally met its match. Cause 1. Economic devastation. Under 4 decades of compounding international sanctions, driven significantly by Iran's own nuclear program and regional military activities, the Iranian rial collapsed catastrophically. In 1979, when the Islamic Republic was founded, $1 bought about 70 rials. By January 2026, $1 bought 1,750,000 rials. That is a collapse of 25,000%. Annual inflation hit 44% in early 2026. Food prices were up more than 70% year on year. When the central bank ended its subsidized dollar import program, chicken and cooking oil disappeared from shelves overnight. Protests erupted immediately. Cause 2. IRGC economic plunder. The Revolutionary Guard does not just run Iran's military. The IRGC runs Iran's economy. Construction contracts, telecommunications companies, import-export businesses, energy sector holdings. Estimates suggest the IRGC controls between 25 and 40% of Iran's entire GDP. The money that should have built hospitals and schools and roads has been flowing into the IRGC's business empire for 40 years, while ordinary Iranians got poorer every single year. Here is the story that got almost no coverage in Western media, because everyone was watching the nuclear negotiations. In late December 2025, 2 months before this war started, shopkeepers in Tehran's Grand Bazaar shut their businesses. Not because of American bombs, because of the collapsing rial. The protests spread from the bazaar to universities, from universities to major cities. Isfahan, Shiraz, Mashhad, nationwide. It became the largest wave of protests since the Woman Life Freedom Uprising of 2022. And then the IRGC did what the IRGC always does. It cracked down, violently, mass arrests, internet blackouts, confirmed across Iran, checkpoints proliferating in every major city, warrantless raids, home searches, mass detentions in Kurdish, Baluchi and Arab-majority regions, fatal shootings at checkpoints operated by IRGC and Basij forces. The death toll estimates range from 3,000 according to the Iranian government, to over 36,000 according to Iran International. Between 3,000 and 36,000 Iranians killed by their own government for protesting the price of food. Protesters chanted, "Death to the dictator, not to America, not to Israel, to their own government." Simultaneously, 2 Iranian diplomats requested asylum in Switzerland and refused to return to Iran. Alireza Jairani Hokmabad, a senior official at Iran's permanent UN mission, requested Swiss asylum in January 2026. Then Gholam Reza Darikvand, Iran's chargé d'affaires in Vienna, applied for Swiss asylum in February. Career diplomats, inside the regime's own apparatus, asking foreign governments to protect them from going home. Hudson Institute wrote it directly. The Islamic Republic is dying. it enters 2026 weaker than at any time since its founding. Before we go further, I want to hear from you. Most Western media has been covering Iran as a military threat, but what you just heard describes a population that was already rising up against its own government before America fired a single shot. Does that change how you think about this war? Tell me in the comments. Is the Iranian government the enemy of its own people? Drop your answer right now, because that question changes everything about what should happen next. Here is the story of how the IRGC went from being Iran's protector to being Iran's biggest internal threat, and why this transformation is the central engine of everything tearing Iran apart right now. The IRGC was founded on April 22, 1979, 47 years ago this week, by direct order of Ayatollah Khomeini. It was designed as a parallel military force loyal to the revolution rather than to the state. Over decades, it expanded. Under Qasem Soleimani, it became the most powerful military actor in the Middle East. But it also became an economic empire. The IRGC transferred more than $1 billion to Hezbollah in Lebanon during the first 10 months of 2025 alone, according to U.S. Treasury disclosures. Hezbollah's 40,000 fighters each earn up to $2,200 per month. By comparison, Lebanon's official army soldiers earn $275 per month. Iran's own people watched their government send billions to foreign militias while Iranian families went hungry. The Jerusalem Post confirmed, the IRGC has resisted restoring authority to civilian institutions and instead tightened its hold over key decision-making positions. The analysis describes it as the most significant political upheaval in Iran since the 1979 revolution. The IRGC is not protecting Iran from enemies. The IRGC has become Iran's primary internal enemy. It controls the economy. It controls the military. It controls the negotiations. It publicly called Iran's own foreign minister an idiot on state-affiliated media. It forced President Pezeshkian to appoint an IRGC loyalist to the National Security Council against his will. It overruled a foreign minister who had the authority to open the Strait of Hormuz. The CIA's own assessment was explicit. Khamenei's death would most likely result in the IRGC consolidating power, potentially transitioning Iran from a theocracy into a de facto military dictatorship. Here is the dimension of Iran's internal collapse that most military analysis completely ignores, because it does not show up on a radar screen or a satellite image. Iran is emptying itself. An estimated 180,000 educated professionals leave Iran every single year. Not poor people, not uneducated people. Engineers, doctors, scientists, entrepreneurs, the people a country needs most to function. Up to 65% of engineering graduates in Iran are planning to leave within 2 years according to research published before this war. Iran has the highest brain drain rate of any country in the world. Every year that passes, Iran becomes less capable of rebuilding even if the war ends tomorrow. The doctors who would treat the wounded are already in Germany and Canada. The engineers who would rebuild the infrastructure are already in Australia and the United States. The entrepreneurs who would restart the economy are already in Dubai and Turkey. Simultaneously, the government is tightening control in a way that accelerates this departure. Increased security checkpoints in urban and rural areas, proliferating surveillance, warrantless raids and home searches, mass detentions in ethnic minority regions, the base expanding operations across the country. Every clampdown makes more people decide to leave. Every person who leaves makes the next clampdown more likely because the government sees dissent everywhere. Iran is caught in a death spiral. Repression drives flight. Flight drives more repression. More repression drives more flight. And this spiral was running at full speed before the first American bomb fell. Here is the wound that goes deeper than economics or military power, the one that no ceasefire deal and no sanctions relief can heal quickly. Iran's identity is fracturing. For 47 years, the Islamic Republic has defined what it means to be Iranian. Islamic law, compulsory hijab, restrictions on music, dancing, and alcohol, the cultural erasure of pre-revolutionary Persian history and identity. But something has been happening across Iran for years, and the war has accelerated it dramatically. Iranians are publicly reclaiming who they were before 1979. Pre-revolutionary symbols, ancient Persian cultural references, secular nationalist rhetoric, Pahlavi-era imagery, named after the royal dynasty that ruled Iran before the revolution. This is not just political opposition. Analysts describe it as the re-emergence of a suppressed civilizational identity, a population reclaiming its history from a government that spent 47 years trying to bury it. When protesters chant death to the dictator, they are not just protesting prices, they are questioning the fundamental premise of the Islamic Republic. They are asking, was this revolution worth it? Did we trade Persian civilization for this? And the government's answer to that question has always been force. But the more force it uses, the more people ask the question. And in 2026, with a supreme leader barely communicating and a military that has seized control of the civilian government, Fewer and fewer Iranians have a convincing answer for why the revolution was worth the price they are still paying for it every single day. Here is the question I want you to debate in the comments. If Iran's government was already collapsing from the inside, if the economy was already destroyed, the people were already starving, the protests were already happening, did the United States need to bomb Iran to achieve its strategic goals? Or did it just accelerate something that was already happening, at enormous cost to both sides? There is no right or wrong answer, but it is the most important question about this war that nobody in Washington is asking publicly. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Here are the 3 scenarios that analysts at the Hudson Institute, the European Policy Center, and the Institute for the Study of War have identified for what Iran becomes after this war. Tell me in the comments which one you think is most likely, because this matters for every American and every person on the planet who relies on Gulf energy. Scenario 1. Military dictatorship. The IRGC fully consolidates power. Mojtaba Khamenei becomes a figurehead ratifying whatever Vahidi decides. The civilian government is progressively marginalized. Iran transitions from a theocracy to a military state, similar to Egypt after 2013, or Pakistan under various military governments. The IRGC cuts a deal with America on nuclear terms it can frame as a victory. Hormuz opens, sanctions are partially lifted, and the IRGC uses that economic relief to cement its internal control. Iran remains authoritarian, the protests are suppressed, the brain drain continues. Hudson Institute assessed this as the most likely near-term outcome. Scenario 2. Regime fragmentation. The fracture between IRGC and civilian government deepens beyond the breaking point. Senior figures begin defecting. Regional commanders start making independent decisions. The supreme leader cannot resolve conflicts between factions. Iran fragments into competing power centers, not necessarily civil war, but effective ungovernability. Scenario 3. Popular revolution. Sustained protests overwhelm the IRGC's ability to suppress them simultaneously across the entire country. Defections begin within the security services themselves. The EPC analysis noted this. Under prolonged pressure, defections within the IRGC cannot be ruled out. The protests achieve the regime change they have been demanding since December 2025. Hudson Institute called these one of 3 plausible outcomes, but said it requires a unifying leader that the protest movement currently lacks. Here is the complete picture that every person watching this needs to hold in their mind simultaneously. Iran's bombs did not start Iran's collapse. Iran's own 47-year experiment with a government that put ideology before economics, the IRGC before the people, foreign militias before domestic welfare, started this collapse long before February 28th. The real was already worthless. The people were already hungry. The protests were already happening. The diplomats were already fleeing. The IRGC was already seizing power from civilian institutions. When Iran's supreme leader was killed on February 28th, he was killed at the moment his government was already facing what the Hudson Institute called an existential threat to its authority from its own population. Something is tearing Iran apart from the inside, and it is not American bombs. It is 47 years of a government that spent its people's money on foreign wars and revolutionary ideology, instead of feeding its own children. It is an IRGC that called its own foreign minister an idiot on state media while making deals with Russia and China. It is a supreme leader who is barely communicating while 92 million people wait to find out who is actually running their country. It is a population that watched its currency become worthless, that watched its neighbors' children get more food than their own, that has been asking for 47 years whether this revolution was worth it, and is now asking louder than ever before. The bombs accelerated this. The bombs did not cause this. And understanding that difference is the difference between thinking this war is about nuclear weapons and understanding that it is actually about whether the government of Iran can survive the people of Iran. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next protest inside Iran could matter more to how this ends than the next round of talks in Pakistan.